frame the questions.
We are a bit early, but I don't know if your channels have already started playing. They would. Oh, you haven't started the telecast. Achha, theek. So you start at 11 exact. Sorry, 12 exactly. So how? What is the House vote on the monetary policy?
As expected.
Good morning, and you have already heard the questions. I mean, sorry, you have already heard my statement. So I would request our media head, Yogesh Dayal, to take over.
To this post-policy press conference. This is the last for the year, and we'll be today interacting with media friends who have come from all media agencies, all media houses been represented. So first of all, I'll welcome the governor and the deputy governors, Shri M.K. Jain, Dr. Michael D. Patra, Shri M. Rajeshwar Rao, Shri T. Ravi Shankar, Executive Directors Dr. O.P. Mal and Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, along with my colleague from MPD, Monish Kapoor, and the media friends. Welcome to this press conference. Before we go ahead, sir, I would request you to make some opening remarks so that we can get started with the press conference.
Thank you. You see, what I have done is that, as I have been doing in the previous Monetary Policy Committee press conferences, I have tried to summarize, the statement, the detailed statement which I made. I have tried to summarize them. And in this context, I would like to highlight 7 points. First, I mean, this basically emanates from whatever is there in the statement, but to just put things in the perspective, I would like to say as follows. The first point is that the Indian economy remains resilient. It has withstood successive global shocks over the last 3 years. Each shock came with unprecedented suddenness and spillovers. Major economies are still reeling under their pressure. However, Indian economy, amidst all this, remains resilient. The second point is that inflation has shown signs of moderation. I repeat, inflation has shown signs of moderation, and the worst is behind us. But there are concerns around core inflation. We cannot take our eyes off inflation. Third, we are now witnessing conducive conditions of macroeconomic stability as reflected in moderation in inflation, fiscal consolidation, and the expectation that the current account deficit is likely to narrow in the coming quarters. Fourth, the Indian rupee has remained one of the least volatile currencies among its Asian peers in 2022 and continues to be so this year also. Fifth, the real policy rate has moved into positive territory and the banking system has exited from the Chakravyuh of excess liquidity without causing any disruption. Monetary policy transmission is also picking up. Sixth, on liquidity, the Reserve Bank will remain flexible and responsive to the requirements of the productive sectors of the economy. And seventh, and the final point, is that we in the Reserve Bank of India stand resolute to deal with all future challenges. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those opening remarks. I will start the press conference I'll invite Mr. Govardhan Rangan from Economic Times to ask his question.
Thank you, Gaji. So good morning, Governor. With this policy, probably you're not surprised, you just met the expectations. But in terms of the future outlook, your inflation forecast for next year is 5.3 and the Q4 of next year is at 5.6. if one looks at when there is a consensus among all the central bankers that inflationary pressures is easing, you also mentioned, but what is the reason for forecasting at 5.6%, which is higher than what the MPR so forecast in the last edition? So why is there? What is that has made you increase the forecast for next year fourth quarter? And what is the message with the two of the MPC members already saying that we have done enough? So how does one read this in terms of so messaging as to what is that in store?
Okay, I would request Deputy Governor Michael Patra to take that question.
As you mentioned, the average inflation is actually lower in 23-24 than in 22-23. And you specifically mentioned the second half of the year. That is because of the base effects of this year playing out into there. That's why the higher inflation.
In terms of the widening difference within the MPCs, when the external members are saying that, okay, you've done enough and the inflation is easing. So why is that, still there is kind of an indication that there may still be rate hikes and, okay, not a pause?
No, ultimately the MPC decision is the majority decision. And with regard to indication, it's not possible to, say anything. I have said it earlier also that in the current tightening cycle especially with regard to rates, we have refrained from giving any forward guidance because sometimes it can be, and quite likely sometimes, it may become counterproductive. So we are not giving any forward guidance. We have said that we will be extremely watchful of the incoming data as well as the outlook on inflation as well as what is happening in the overall economy. Based on that, we will decide going into the future months.
Thank you, sirs. I'll invite
Anything else
Mr.
you-
Thank you, sirs. I'll invite Mr. Anand Adhikari from Business Today to ask his question.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I have done some analysis of these three food items. I was looking at the CPI basket, and I have seen cereals, eggs, and spices. Consistent
Cereals?
Eggs and spices. So they have been a consistent rise since May, month on month. I mean, cereals and spices. I think not even a single month that has gone down. In case of eggs, they are prices are high, but in the last 2 months we have seen at least 5% rise in the last 2 months. I just want to know what is your assessment of these three items in the food basket, and will they remain sticky?
You see, each component of the food inflation, or let me put it this way, each component of the headline inflation, and beyond that, each component of the food inflation, the core inflation, and the fuel inflation, each of the components, the momentum, that is the month-on-month momentum, are very closely examined by the MPC and by our research teams within the RBI. And based on that, we give out certain statements. Like, for example, I have said that the moderation in vegetable prices in the last 2 months, that is in November and December, they more than offset the price momentum in cereals, and I have mentioned 1 or 2 items there. So we are examining all these components, and the future trajectory of each of these components, the month-on-month momentum, it's all built into our projections.
Thank you, sir. I'll invite Mr. Vishwanath Nair from BQ Prime to ask his question.
Good afternoon, Governor. In your statement, you mentioned that banks have come out of this Chakravyuh of excess liquidity. You're also pointing out that the deposit rates are rising between May and December. You pointed 13 basis points on weighted average term deposit, fresh deposits. Having said that, since the last policy, the gap between the credit and deposit growth has reduced, but it still remains quite wide. As the prospects for credit growth are rising sharply still, how long can banks continue having this 400-500 basis point gap between the credit and deposit growth rates?
You would like to take that, or Jain will take that? I think I would request DG Michael Patra to take that question, and DG Jain can supplement thereafter.
Yeah, as you point out, the difference has narrowed, but there is still a difference, and it's really up to the banks to mobilize deposits and make up the gap. They are doing so through certificates of deposit and reducing their non-SLR investments, but they need to mobilize deposits on their own to meet the gap.
Thank you, sirs. I'll invite.
Just a moment. I
sorry.
would request DG Jain to supplement.
Okay, I will supplement what Dr. Patra has talked about it. There is an increase in the deposit side also. The sources of funding we have analyzed, and we have seen that the sources of funding are coming from deposit as well as the borrowings. The CD ratio as of now for the banking sector has increased little bit, but still reasonable within the range. And the liquidity coverage ratio is still at very comfortable level, much higher than the regulatory prescription of 100%.
Thank you, sirs. I'll invite Ms. Lata Venkatesh from CNBC TV 18 to ask a question.
Thank you, Yogesh. Governor, 2-3 questions, please. So this
It will
real
be good if
policy
you
rate,
can ask one, because
the real policy rate, you said that, now 5.6 inflation and 6.5% repo rate, but the 1-year T-bill is trading at 6.95. So effectively, if you take 5.6% inflation, the real rate is already about 140 basis points, 130 basis points. Will you be guided only by the pre-COVID, which was, I think, 230 basis points difference, real positive rate? So what will guide your decision to pause? Or will it be also actions of other central banks? And if I may, so what is the total exposure of the banking and the NBFCs to the Adani Group? Because we just heard that REC has 7,000 crores. So is there a number that you all have already assessed? And if you can tell us whether you would be cautious that that number shouldn't increase.
okay. And now the first part of the question, relating to that real rates and all, Dr. Patra can take, then I will take over the next question. I mean, the next part of the question.
So as you point out, we have
Put
nudged
the mic on.
we've nudged the real policy rate into positive territory. What its level will be decided by the evolving macroeconomic configuration. So it's not necessarily guided by pre-pandemic levels or anything, but by the evolving growth and inflation trajectory.
130 is big. No, real rate.
No, actually, we're talking about the real policy rate, right? So you take the policy rate and adjust it for 4 quarters ahead inflation, as we've always done, and you get less than 1%. You get 0.9. Okay. And about foreign banks and all that, we take into account all developments in the world, but monetary policy has an exclusive domestic orientation, and it will react to domestic developments.
Now, with regard to the other part of the question about the exposure of the banking sector to the to one particular business conglomerate, we have issued a press release on last Friday. I have nothing more to add to that. Individual cases and their numbers, as you are aware, we do not discuss in the public domain. Having said that, let me mention in addition, because so many questions are being raised in the public domain. In the last 3 to 4 years, the Reserve Bank has taken a number of steps to strengthen the resilience of Indian banks. We have come out with clear guidelines to regulate the governance in Indian banks. We have issued guidelines about the functioning of the audit committees. We have issued guidelines for the functioning of the risk management committees. We have now made it mandatory for appointment of chief risk officer in banks. We have also made it a mandatory for appointment of chief compliance officers of the banks, and we have given through our regulations the desired level of autonomy to the chief risk officer and the chief compliance officer with regard to his functioning within the bank. The chief risk officer, for example, reports directly to the audit committee. And there's so many other regulations which I am not going into. We have also rationalized in the last 2 years the large exposure norms. And all that I would like to add at this point of time, that the Indian banking sector, including the the NBFC sector, since you referred to a couple of them, the Indian banking sector and the NBFC sector continue to be resilient and strong. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Anup Roy from Bloomberg. Request him to ask his question.
Thank you, sir. Sir, a couple of countries in the Southeast Asia region, they are now warning about inflation and the resurgence of inflation. And you are also seeing inflation to be sticky, the core inflation to be sticky. So what is your, do you fear a resurgence of inflation back, sir?
No, we have given our roadmap, we have given our projections,
Mhm.
our estimated, our projections we have given out now for 23, 24. And we have factored, we have also highlighted all the upsides and all the downsides. And beyond that, it is not possible for me to, say anything else. And as regards the level of inflation in other countries, that does not impact our decision making. Our decision making will be governed by the domestic factors. And also one more point that has to be kept in mind, see the gap between the inflation target in many, in several countries and where their current inflation is. The gap is much wider compared to our target and where our inflation is.
Sir, if I may ask one more question. So today, you have, hiked by 25 basis point, and a lot of analysts were thinking that maybe you will give a clear tone that we are going to pause, but you are in no mood. So clearly inflation is very much there in your mind. So will you ever give an indication that we will pause here?
Currently, our mood is a mood of optimism.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Ms. Anshika Kayast from Hindu Business Line. So that's it.
Please press the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you'll be issuing directions on penal charges for financial institutions. Just wanted to understand what has been so what prompted this and what has the RBI observed so far? And second, just quick question, what is the sort of preparedness level? I know you started getting feedback on the ECL draft framework. What has been the sort of feedback and comments so far, and by when could we expect the final guidelines, and what is the general preparedness level of banks as of now, according to you?
Okay, I would request Deputy Governor Rajeshwar Rao to take that question, both the questions.
Thank you. Now, regarding the first issue of penal charges, basically the supervisory reviews which have been conducted by RBI, they have revealed that most banks use penal rate on top of the normal interest rate in case of payment defaults and non-compliance with the terms and conditions of the credit facility, sanctioning the credit facilities. The reviews indicated there are diverging practices and there were excessive charges in some cases, so they were leading to grievance and disputes. So essentially what we are trying to do is we are trying to frame guidelines which will ensure that there will be kind of a transparent and uniform approach to this issue. So that is the background under which we give the guide, we're proposing to issue guidelines on the penal charges. Now, as far as the ECL norms are concerned, I think I think the ECL norms, it's generally assumed that the ECL norms may be higher than what is there under the current approach, but that may not be necessarily the case in all the cases. So that is one point. And if you look at the position of the banks, the current position is that in terms of the financials, the banks are well prepared to absorb it. In fact, the PCR ratios have improved to about 71.5% in September 22 as compared to 68.1% last year. And the discussion paper has been placed in public domain. We are expecting the comments to come in by February end, and maybe shortly thereafter, we will propose to issue the final guidelines, taking into account the feedback being received from the public. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Ajay Ramnathan from Financial Express.
Good afternoon. Governor, this is regarding the National Financial Information Registry. Now, it was announced in the budget and we believe that a draft is ready. So I just want to know how this will differ from the credit information bureaus that we already have.
I think DG Rajeshwar Rao can take that question, and if you want to supplement. Okay.
There have been consultations between RBI and the government on this NFIR bill 2023. Further course of action will depend on once the bill is passed. And as far as the NFIR's role is concerned, I think we expect it will contain ancillary information over and above what is already being held by the credit information companies.
which will be, part of this new registry that we are envisaging, and it's under discussion with the government. I mean, a lot of discussion has already happened, based on which the government has announced it in the budget.
Thank you, sir. I'll invite Ms. Chloe Cornish from the Financial Times to ask a question.
Thank you, Yogesh. International banks were key financiers of the Adani Group. Moody's and other agencies have said that the Indian banking system is not badly exposed to the Adani Group, unless they start to become major lenders to the group, which may become less able to avail financing from international lenders. Fitch actually said there is a tail risk that fallout from the controversy could broaden and influence India's sovereign rating. Will you be giving any guidance to domestic banks about their exposure to the Adani Group going forward?
You see, I think I have replied whatever I wanted to say. We have made our own assessment. I mean, other agencies make their own assessments. In the Reserve Bank, we have made our own assessments. And I have said whatever I just said a little while ago and whatever we said in the press note based on our assessment. The large exposure guidelines prescribed by the RBI are fully complied with by all the banks. And so far as the, Indian banking system now, the total, the strength, the size, and the resilience of the Indian banking system is now much larger and much stronger to be affected by, an individual incident or a case like this. The banking system is strong, and also you saw I think this whole perception is coming because of the market capitalization of the shares of the group. When banks lend money to a company or to a group of companies, the banks do not lend on the basis of market capitalization of that particular company. The banks lend on the basis of the strength of their company, the fundamentals of their company, or the strength and the fundamentals of their analysis if it's a greenfield project, the anticipated cash flows, and so many other things go into the appraisal of the banks. And the appraisal methods of Indian banks have significantly improved over the years. So I think I would just reiterate again that the banking system is stable, continues to be strong. DG Jain, would you like to add anything?
Governor has already explained that our domestic bank's exposure is against the underlying assets, the operating cash flows, and the projects under implementation, and not based on the market cap. The exposure as of now is not very significant across all the banks and the NBFCs as well. The exposure against shares of the domestic banks is insignificant.
Thank you, sirs. I'll move on to Mr. Ben Josh from the Press Trust of India, PTI.
Hi, Governor. Is 6.4% is an achievable target given the external risk?
Given the
external risk, is it an achievable target? Last time you lowered the target many times, or are you in a comfortable position to repeat the same? Even the nominal GDP growth is good. The budget has expected 10%, down from 15.5% this year.
You see, last year we had initially given 7.8%, if I recall correctly. Then, of course, the war started in Europe and so many other developments took place. But I think I'll leave it to Dr. Patra to take that question.
Yeah.
That first quarter you have up from 7.1 to 7.8. Why?
So first of all, on your question, we recognize that the global situation may result in net exports becoming a drag on our growth. And therefore, if you see 2023-24 relative to 2023, there is a deceleration from 7% to 6.4%. That actually factors in a drag from net exports. As of now, given current projections of world trade, world output by international agencies which are factored in here, it is achievable. Yeah, and these are year-on-year forecasts, so they have a momentum and a base effect. Some of it is coming from the base, that is 22-23.
No, I think that discussion can continue after the press conference.
Thank
Sorry
you, sir.
about that, but yeah.
Thank you, sir. I'll invite Gopika Gopakumar from the Mint to ask a question.
Thank you, Yogesh, sir. So this is with respect to liquidity. You've said that the liquidity remains surplus, although it's lower compared to last year. Now, and you are looking at different liquidity operations on both sides of the lab. Where would you want to see the liquidity? Is there some level now you're looking at before it starts normalizing?
You see, in beginning of this financial year, I think the liquidity was about 7 to 8 lakh crores in April 22. Now the daily average daily LAF, I have given out the number. I think it is 1,60,000 crore, 1.6 lakh crore. I have mentioned it in the statement. And during this period also on, I think, couple of occasions, on 2 occasions, we undertook variable rate repo operations for, very short periods when there was a little bit of a stress in the liquidity situation. Our effort, and as my colleague Deputy Governor M.K. Jain pointed out, the LCR, the liquidity coverage ratio of the banks is much more than, I would not say much more, but quite a bit more than our LCR norms. So they have that much of liquidity to support their lending. And the CD ratios are also quite, at very, very reasonable levels. So there is a lot of capacity with the banks to continue their lending operations. Now, your question is where we will?
What kind of levels do you see? Because we have the TLT redemptions.
No,
both
that
on the
will
TLTRO.
that will depend on the evolving situation. It's difficult for me to pinpoint and give out a number. It will depend on the evolving situation and the credit offtake, the needs of the economy. But we have given a statement that we will we will sort of keep in mind, we will be responsive to the needs of the productive sectors of the economy so far as liquidity is concerned. Under that broad principle, we will act. Exact number difficult to say because there are several moving parts.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Manojit Saha from the Business Standard.
Thank you, sir. Now, monetary policy acts with a lag, we all know. 250 basis point hike in a matter of 6 months, 8 months is a large hike. As some of the external members have suggested, why don't we can step back and see how the previous hikes pan out? What is holding you against that? Is it core inflation that you are bothered about? That is why you are not indicating any future guidance on a pause or something?
You see, I have said in my statement, and the MPC resolution also says that at this point of time, a 25 basis point hike is considered as appropriate, taking into account where we, the mix of factors and the data that we have ahead of us, but data is always backward looking. We have also looked at the outlook, which is more forward looking. So at current juncture, the MPC felt that a 25 basis point hike is warranted very much. And I have also said that since we have moderated the pace of hike, 50, then we did last time 35, now we have done 25. So this gives us room. It's there in the statement. This gives us elbow room to assess the impact of the actions undertaken so far. So it's a constant exercise which is going on, and we will continue to assess that and take an appropriate call as we go into the future. So therefore, I would suggest that, I can only reply on the basis of the MPC's decision, which is based on majority decision. So far as individual members who have given a different point of view, I think you have to wait for the minutes, the respective minutes of each of the members to come to draw your conclusions. You would like to anything add?
One more thing. Do you think that the bank should be proactive, prudent? It's a sign of prudence to increase provisioning, standard asset provisioning to that particular group, because the going is good now. They are in a position to do that. Generally, RBI's stance is that when the going is good, you should increase your provisioning.
You see, we have given our regulatory guidelines. Banks I think, the first question when you say that banks should be more prudent, I think that presupposes that the banks are not prudent. Let me make it very clear that the Indian banks are very prudent. They utilize the COVID, during the COVID time, I think most of the banks, both public and private sector banks, they built up their capital. It was a suggestion made by us, and the banks utilized the opportunity of liquidity surplus in the market. Most of the banks have built up additional capital. They are all well capitalized. They are prudent. The bank managements will take their own decisions wherever they feel there is a need for additional provision to be made. And why do you see it only in the context of this case? There are so many cases where the banks, there are early warning signals. There are so many cases where the bank assess the situation of, I'm not talking about the case you are referring to. There are so many other cases where the banks proactively make, advance provision. So it's a part of the regular, risk management on the part of the bank. So therefore, I think let us look at things objectively, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Ms. Swati Bhatt Chete from Reuters. So that's it.
Thank you, Yogesh, sir. Governor, you are remaining focused on withdrawal of accommodation going ahead, and liquidity surplus, like you said, has come down significantly. It's just at about 1.6 trillion. With the government having announced a record market borrowing for next year, do you think you're going to be able to manage it effectively? And would you require, open market operations or purchases going ahead into the year to help manage the borrowing? And are you open to that? Thank you.
I would request Deputy Governor Ravi Shankar to take that question.
Yeah, I mean, the market borrowing, last year was considered high. It was managed smoothly. It will be managed smoothly this year. I think we are jumping the gun talking about OMOs and all at this point of time. There is adequate demand. Markets are deep enough. So I think we shouldn't have any problem, irrespective of the liquidity conditions.
And the net borrowing number, if you look at it, correct me if I'm wrong, I think last year it was about 11.08 lakh crores. This year it is 11.80 lakh crores on a expanded nominal GDP base.
Thank you, sir. So you want to add?
Have you concluded? But please go ahead. Yeah.
Both the net borrowing was just slightly about 7% high. Gross borrowing is about 8% higher compared to last year. If you look at the increase last year vis-a-vis the previous year, all these are extremely moderate. So, we are fairly confident that there won't be any problem in mobilizing government borrowings this year.
So, but you'll have announced a measure that you are proposing to allow lending and borrowing of G-Secs. Is that a new thing? I mean, now lending and borrowing, those who are in the CSGL can do. Other parties also can do? Is that the new step?
As far as lending and borrowing of securities can be done in many ways. One of the simple ways of doing it is through repo markets, which happens even today. Some particular entities are not permitted to borrow money, like insurance companies and all that. And they have a lot of stock of securities. So allowing lending and borrowing directly against securities, not through repo market, will enable them to lend. All this will add liquidity into the market, will add efficiency into the market, and will improve price discovery in the market.
Also, just one clarification, the market timings move back to 9 to 5 from when? It didn't specify when do we move back to
It will be issued, the notification will be issued today itself, you will know.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Mayur Shetty from Times of India.
Governor, this move to allow lending and borrowing of government securities, is this aimed at enabling short selling? And also on the government borrowing program, are you hoping to widen and deepen the market, considering that most of the banks we speak to are saying that they will liquidate the SLR to meet the gap between deposits and lending?
I think Dr. Patra, you can take that.
I think DG Ravi Shankar answered that question. The idea is to add depth and liquidity to the market to allow efficient price discovery. And that's the enabling conditions which will allow the borrowing program to go through smoothly. That's the idea. Short selling is part of the market. We have allowed short selling a long time ago. Yeah. So it's part of the market. But what we are trying to do is to encourage depth and liquidity and price discovery in the market.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Pankaj Aher from the Informist to ask his question.
Thank you. Governor sir, why is core inflation so sticky? Is the RBI thinking of any specific additional measures to bring this under control, including perhaps advising the government of India on this? And does one understand that as long as core is sticky, RBI will continue with the tighter monetary policy?
Yes, core is sticky, and typically core inflation is associated with excess demand, which is why monetary policy acts to bring down core. And that is why we have been raising rates so far. So we expect our rate actions as they pass through into the economy to modulate demand and modulate core. And in fact, if you see our projections, embedded in the headline is a core trajectory, which is going to be slightly lower than what it was in 22-23. It will be sticky, but slightly lower.
So one does expect that some tightness will continue. The tighter monetary policy will continue for longer then.
No, you can't expect that because you're seeing headline actually moderating to 5.3. So obviously, core is also moderating, not at the pace which we would like, but it is certainly moderating.
With the projection of 5.6 for next quarter, next year, fourth quarter, that doesn't give the comfort that you are seeming to communicate.
Yes, we are in an extraordinary situation with overlapping shocks, as Governor terms it, and therefore these effects have not been seen in the past. So we will expect core to reflect those concerns, but core will moderate if monetary policy remains resolute on its goals.
And fourth quarter, there's also the base effect about which Dr. Patra talked about earlier. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Ankur Mishra from the ET Now.
Hello, Governor. My question is regarding the stance part. You have continued to remain on withdrawal of accommodation. One of the expectation was that you may shift to neutral, but I want to understand that how far or near we are from that shifting of stance part, and what will be the favorable conditions.
I think I have answered. I think you may put it in your words now.
Please.
I have put it in my words. Now let's have your words.
Please look for a decisive moderation in inflation and a propensity to align with the target.
एक और सवाल सर मैं हिंदी में ईटी नाउ स्वदेश के बेहाफ पे पूछना चाहूंगा सर लेंडिंग एप्स पे सरकार ने कुछ कड़े कदम उठाए हैं अभी रिसेंटली मैं ये जानना चाहता हूँ क्या ये रिजर्व बैंक की परामर्श पे हुआ है और लेंडिंग गाइडलाइंस डिजिटल लेंडिंग गाइडलाइंस भी रिजर्व बैंक द्वारा इशू की गई थी पास में वहां पर कुछ कॉन्करेंट इश्यूज थे जो सरकार से डिस्कस होने थे वहां पर क्या प्रोग्रेस है
Who will take that question? You will take.
Okay. I think जैसे आपने बोला हमने किसी डिजिटल लेंडिंग ऐप का बैन तो बोला नहीं है what we have done actually is I think ministry we have shared the list of apps which are used by the entities regulated by RBI with the ministry. Ministry has I think requested the play stores to remove these apps which are not what you call operated by the regulated entities from the play store. So that is the position as it stands today.
No, you see, we have these apps, वो RBI के regulated entities नहीं है. हमारे जो regulated entities है, जो मतलब RBI का certificate of registration है, वो primarily NBFCs है. In turn, NBFCs कई सारे apps use करते हैं. तो हम वो जो NBFCs है, उनसे हमने एक list मंगवाया कि कौन-कौन ऐप जो because काफी सारे illegitimate, illegal apps भी है जो कि अपने आप अपने आप लेंडिंग करने की मतलब प्रॉमिस करते हैं मोबाइल में मैसेज भेजते हैं जो कि कोई भी एनबीएफसी सेक्टर का मतलब नो एनबीएफसी सेक्टर हैज अपॉइंटेड देम तो एनबीएफसी सेक्टर के द्वारा जो एनबीएफसी इस लेंडिंग बिजनेस में है डिजिटल लेंडिंग में है उनके द्वारा जो जो ऐप वो यूज करते हैं उसका लिस्ट हमने गवर्नमेंट को दे दिया है उस बेसिस पर गवर्नमेंट ने ये कदम उठाई
Dhanyawad, sir. I'll move on to Mr. Hitesh Vyas from the Indian Express.
Hi, sir. Good afternoon. I just want to know the progress on retail digital rupee. What is the volume and value of transactions happened in digital retail CBDC?
Yeah, I think DG Ravi Shankar can take that question.
It's progressing.
Mike, just draw the mic close to.
Retail CBDCs, there are about there are more than 50,000 users now, more than 5,000 merchants who are participating. There are 8 banks which are participating, which we are planning to increase, to another 5 are in the process, but will over the time increase to all major banks. There are 5 cities in which it is being done now. We are going to add another 9 cities going forward, and gradually we will be increasing that. The total number of transactions are roughly about 7,70,000, still about a number of transactions. A couple of days back, I don't have the exact fix on the amounts, but these are small value transactions, so amount is not that significant. Having said all this, and at the risk of being right, let me just reiterate that we want the process to happen, but we want the process to happen gradually and slowly. We are in no hurry or this thing to make something happen very quickly. We have our targets in terms of users, in terms of merchants, and all that. We will go through it slowly. As I have told earlier, we don't want to do something without actually understanding what the possible impact is, and that impact can be managed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we'll take last 3 questions, if you permit.
Okay.
Because there are 4 or 5 people who have not yet asked a question. So I'll start with Mr. Brajesh Kumar from Z Business.
सर दिस साइड सर मेरा सवाल ये होगा कि म्यूचुअल फंड की जो ओवरसीज लिमिट है $7 बिलियन की उसको बढ़ाने को लेकर कोई रीथिंकिंग है आपकी तरफ से या किसी दूसरे रेगुलेटर की ओर से या इंडस्ट्री पार्टिसिपेंट्स की ओर से कोई रिक्वेस्ट आई है? और दूसरा सवाल ये होगा, छोटा सा फॉलोअप क्वेश्चन होगा कि जो पेनल चार्जेस की बात कर रहे हैं आप, तो आप अपनी तरफ से कोई लिमिट सेट करेंगे या वो एंटिटीज फ्री होंगी सेट करने के लिए, लेकिन ट्रांसपेरेंट वे में?
पेनल चार्जेस के बारे में जो ड्राफ्ट सर्कुलर वो बहुत जल्द आ जाएगा और उसके बारे में मैं प्रीजज नहीं करना चाहता हूँ। वो ड्राफ्ट सर्कुलर आ जाने दीजिए, फिर आपको पता लग जाएगा कि उसका क्या जनरली क्या है। और आरबीआई का हमेशा पिछले, अगर आप देखेंगे पिछले कुछ सालों में, प्रिंसिपल बेस्ड गाइडलाइंस हम यूजुअली करते हैं। हम कोई कोई सेट नंबर नहीं देते, एक्सेप्टिंग द रेगुलेटरी गाइडलाइंस जो है कि आपका CET1 टियर 1 कैपिटल इतना होगा, आपका GNPA शुड बी लोअर देन दिस। अदर देन दैट सारे केसेस में हम प्रिंसिपल बेस्ड गाइडलाइंस देते हैं। लेकिन मैं आपको रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि वो ड्राफ्ट गाइडलाइंस के लिए आप वेट कर थोड़ा वेट करिए, वो बहुत जल्द आ जाएगा। और दूसरा क्वेश्चन क्या था? म्यूचुअल फंड के रिक्वेस्ट, म्यूचुअल फंड कुछ मार्केट प्लेयर्स, कई सारे रिक्वेस्ट आए हैं, ऐसे बात नहीं है कि नहीं आए हैं, आए थे। हमने उसको इनका एग्जामिन किया हुआ है और अभी तक हमने उस बारे में कोई पहले कोई पॉजिटिव फैसला अभी तक नहीं लिया। और जब पॉजिटिव कुछ डिसीजन होगा तो आपको पता लग जाएगा, हम इशू कर देंगे। लेकिन अभी तक अभी तक वो इंक्रीज करने का कोई प्रपोजल नहीं है एट द मोमेंट। या प्लीज।
ये म्यूचुअल फंड का लिमिट इंक्रीज का इशू पहले भी आ चुका है, करीब 1 साल पहले, और उस वक्त ये डिसाइड किया गया था कि उसको वैसे ही रहने दें। और बाकी जो गवर्नर बोल रहे हैं तो बाकी वैसे उसके बाद और कोई डिसीजन नहीं हुआ।
Thank you, sirs. Maybe the last question to Manish Suvarna from Money Control.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Governor, sir. So I have 2 questions. One is on the stance. So, Governor, as you mentioned, as you said in the statement that overall monetary conditions remain accommodative, and hence the MPC decided to remain focused on withdrawal of accommodation. So what will come first? The MPC changing its stance of withdrawal of accommodation or monetary conditions not being accommodative? And second question is on these vending machines for coins. So what is the
Second question?
vending machine for coins? So what is the rationale behind it? So why there is need been felt for you to announce this? Thank you.
See, monetary policy stance के बारे में आपने जो question पूछा, sorry, you asked in English. So the question which you asked on monetary policy, it's a kind of a chicken and egg question. So my reply is, let the chicken decide. And but on a more serious note, we cannot give any forward guidance of this nature. I have said it earlier also. We watch all the incoming trends and we will take an appropriate decision at the appropriate time. Beyond that, इस बारे में I will not be able to give any forward guidance, and we are quite open about it in the with regard to our unwillingness to, and there's a reason for it. We don't want to create unreasonable or unnecessary expectations in the market. और जो coin vending machine में के बारे में I would request DG Ravi Shankar to reply.
Coins, we have a peculiar situation where the supply is very high. It's taking up a lot of storage space. It's not getting properly distributed. At the same time, there is demand in pockets. So one way of increasing absorption of coins into the system is to make coin available in places where there is demand. Now, for that purpose, we earlier had these coin vending machines placed strategically at marketplaces and so on. For example, vegetable market, just as an example, where there is a large demand. The problem then was that the currency that was being fed into these machines was found to be, very often fake and all that. So that became an issue. And we could not, those could not be checked at that point in time. So the way out for that is something that we planned, which is that let's get rid of the feeding in of currency entirely. And since we have UPI available with us, and everyone can use a cell phone, and there can be a simple QR code. So instead of feeding in currency and getting your change, you just transfer money from your bank account to the concerned bank and withdraw your change. So we took some time to develop that machine. We are trying it out in a pilot stage. We will expand that. We expect that this will improve the distribution of coins in the system. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't get.
You'd push cash withdrawals from ATMs as well. Apart from maybe the largest bank in India, nobody else has made any major announcements on that front. So since you're focusing on coin withdrawal through UPI, I just want to ask if cash withdrawal from UPI is also going to be reality soon.
Cash withdrawal from, there are other models that we are looking at, but let's not, go into those at this time. If we come up with anything, we'll let everyone know.
Thank you, sirs. I think we have run out of time. I am seeing
छोटा सा
hands.
सवाल सर, एक छोटा सा सवाल
बॉम्बे हाई कोर्ट इसके बारे में अलग से डिस्कस कर लेंगे.
सर, रिसेंट बॉम्बे हाई कोर्ट का जो वर्डिक्ट आया 81 बॉन्ड्स पे, तो उसको लेकर क्या कोई
नहीं, हम
रीथिंकिंग होगी
we will
पॉलिसी लेवल पे?
separately हम डिस्कस करेंगे उसके बारे में. I think already आपने एक दो बार क्वेश्चन ऑलरेडी पूछ चुके हैं आप. So sorry about that. I think we can
With this, we come to the closure of today's press conference, and of course.